So here we go, starting off with Bitcoin as always, and I want to bring us back to this chart over here, the daily volatility versus stochastic chart, because this is getting towards our general target that we had about almost 2 weeks ago now, I believe. This was, coming in from 26th of April when we got that signal. Now, the 9th of May. So moving our way towards that target, in fact, very, very close. And this signal does kind of show us about where we can kind of expect a bounce for the short and medium term on price action, or at least a very likely bounce. So first and foremost, this signal was born upon very, 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 very low BBWP, which is a volatility indicator, which measures the dispersion of returns. And for the 10 out of the last 11 iterations, the 11th iteration is the one that we're working on right here, it has led to an average move of about 20%, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, typically over the course of, couple weeks, let's say, it can be a little bit more, it can be a little bit less. I think there's a lot more variance in that, but ultimately what is a lot more consistent is the percentage move, which again, volatility is direction neutral, and that does mean that it can go to the upside or the downside. Obviously this one was to the downside. We identified that with the daily stochastic, which we had back on over here on that move. But for right now, that move from that volatility expansion point would suggest a potential low somewhere around the $32,500 region, which does line up with several other things as well. Doesn't mean that we can't wick a little bit lower, of course. And again, that is an average. So when we do kind of draw this one out, which I will do right now, you can see 20% puts Bitcoin at around about $32,500. Bitcoin's gotten about $500 away from that for the current moment in time. So I do suspect that there's probably one more dumbola probably to open up today for US markets as people kind of get crazy over the weekend, start to stress over things as they look at the charts and read all of the news and whatnot, and then sell into a Monday, and then typically Tuesday, Wednesday, you do see a bit of a turnaround, which is kind of what I'm looking for here. But ultimately, remember, this is an average, and we certainly have seen moves on the upper end of that, even closer to 30%. And it would be relevant to look at this signature over here as one of the ones that are likely to have, be a little bit more on the extremes of that estimate, as this one was lower for longer. In fact, a lot more comparable to what we saw in January on one of the major dumbola parties. And if we actually went back to July of 2021, that would also be comparable. And that was a pretty big move back on over here. I think that one a little bit more closer to 30% as well. So just out of curiosity, I do kind of want to play around with numbers here and see what would price action suggest, what would price adjust if we did see, a deeper retracement on that. And that would be about 30% or closer to 30%, which puts Bitcoin about 28,500. So if you're on the higher term timeframes like the daily, I'm kind of looking for a bounce within the midst of that range. We've seen this signal many times, even the past few months here. We've seen it about 2 to 3 times, and we're getting, we just got another one. So I do want to kind of point this out for the people who have been on this channel for a while now, so you can see how these things play out over time. Yes, they do require patience. Obviously, a fucking daily signal is going to be a daily signal, not played out in the same day or the next day or the day after that, but very likely over the next, few weeks in this case. And I would be looking at this as likely to reach lower as long as the daily stochastic momentum is still downside angled. That is the condition that I am looking for to be fulfilled until we do initiate a daily bounce. In this case, daily stochastic momentum will remain to the downside, so downside pressure, as long as Bitcoin is below 35,000 and about 500 or so right now. So ultimately, I would still say that there is pressure down in the short term, and Bitcoin likely does make another leg slightly lower. And then, probably around Tuesday to Wednesday, I would be looking for a bounce again. Anyways, in this case, I should also denote this macro chart over here for CME, actually, no, this is spot price action right here. This is the index. A couple things to be aware of, obviously. One of them is just this blue box that we've had in for a long time. This is again on the macro chart, which is basically around that low $30,000 region. So again, a nice bounce region, obviously. Also in alignment with the 0.5 Fibonacci retracement, that's about 32,000 even. So I would be looking at that area on a closing basis, for example. And this is a macro fib, by the way, to the ultimate high of this cycle from the ultimate low of the prior cycle. So I do like this area again for a weekly bounce, but when we're talking about a weekly, that is not the same thing as like a daily nor a full hour, for God's sake. So this probably takes some time to play out. So I do expect wicks lower first, and then perhaps a bounce, maybe starting around midpoint this week, something like that. Until then, it should be known that short-term time frame stochastic momentum is still pointed further south and is pressure down. 6 hour is showing downside pressure as long as Bitcoin's below 34.5. So not that far. Well, actually, yeah, about $1,000 away right now on CME. 12 hour is fresh down below 37.6, and actually volatility suggesting that this move is still underway. Full hour is also going to be with extremes here on the HVP of actually stochastic volatility right here, and that will also have downside pressure as long as Bitcoin's below 34.4. Again, I am using CME for these right now because CME just seems to get it better, especially on a Monday and a Tuesday from my back testing. 3 hours is going to be showing at 33.8, pressure down as long as below there, and hourly is probably flippy floppy right now, and it is actually up as long as Bitcoin's above about 33 and 400 or so. So ultimately, what does that align with? Maybe short term, a bit of sideways here, maybe tries for a little bit of a short term bounce, but ultimately I do suspect that Bitcoin tries a little bit lower first before the real bounce, if you will. And then we could talk about bounce targets, of which I would bring up this chart over here. Let's go into a lower term time frame. All I'm doing for right now is taking a fib from the high to the low of this general range that Bitcoin's been in since basically the start of the year. And that would suggest a 382 right around about $38,000. I would go as far to say that as long as Bitcoin is below about 38, then heavy pressure down, and any, obviously any rally is still just another lower high, but technically speaking, Bitcoin could rally somewhere around there. That is essentially where, actually no, the gap that Bitcoin left off from last Friday is about 35.5 to 36,000 bucks. So that would be a pretty, pretty obvious one as well. Very likely plays in a bit of a range if Bitcoin were to get there. But ultimately, we are starting to hit extremes here on the shorter term timeframes especially. So I don't think that they have too much lower to go before a nice bounce. Again, I'm kind of looking, around Tuesday, Wednesday, if you will. 4 hour BBWP is at extremes here, so very likely looking for a contraction phase. Again, I do think it's going to top out here a little bit more, but we're getting very close. 6 hours, same thing, getting way up there. I still want to see it base off a little bit more, and then, looking for a bit of a corrective bounce. 3 hour, same thing over here. It's probably going to hit extremes twice, as you would expect, and hourly will definitely be hitting extremes twice. And yes, it's very, 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 very close there. So ultimately, probably, a little bit of a wick lower if I had to guess right here. And at that point, there's going to be a lot of divergences built up, especially on the low and medium term timeframes. You can see the 4 hour right now is, it's going to have it as long as you're above about 16.29 on 4 hour RSI. But again, that would suggest that, Bitcoin goes a little bit lower and then tries for a low. So ultimately that will be very likely to play out. But again, that does not make me look for a macro reversal here. We've been speaking about potential hopium on this channel and what it would likely look like. And while, it's still going to always be valid as long as Bitcoin's above about 32,000 bucks on a higher term time frame closure, the more that Bitcoin kind of spends around here, the more and more it looks like it probably won't. So, if Bitcoin is going to play out the hopium, which I think would look something like this, where it kind of spends its time going sideways and up over the course of the majority of summer, something like that, that would be a really, 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 really good sign, fully confirmed with any sort of a higher time frame closure of 44,000 bucks. At that point, I'd very likely be looking, somewhere around 60, the 1.618 Fibonacci extension right here in the months to follow after that. Again, this is hopium in my opinion, but that's what I think it'd probably look like if Bitcoin does salvage itself here. Other than that, we're just seeing these signals play out. Hidden bearish divergence on the daily, volatility ticking up. That one was fresh as of last week. So ultimately, risk does remain lower, I do believe. On top of that, we did confirm something of significance yesterday night for the weekly closure, and it was this. Let me just pull back on over here. We'll go to the weekly, and that was the weekly silver cross to the downside. That has officially happened. I can put on my info box to see what price action would need to essentially close below in order to remain within the downside cross of this, which is basically 44,000 bucks. So unlikely to happen. Again, it wouldn't need to happen. More sideways here will naturally bring that number down. But for right now, again, pressure down. And if we look at the historical results of this, for example, there's a couple things. There have been 3 iterations in the past. 2 of those 3 iterations have been basically, your last dump before the macro low. One of them was, of course, March 2020 for the Rona dump, of which that one did not do well. If you play the cross as it is, obviously this was, a very volatile and immediate move. So naturally speaking, a cross like this is not going to work well in that case. So do want to talk about the limitations of it. Obviously nothing is perfect, but if you go back to 2014, you see the same thing over here. Cross happens in October. You see a nice little pump about a month later. rejected, and then from that high to the next major macro low, 63.5% down over the course of 63 days. Kind of nasty. Same thing or similar thing in 2018, obviously. Let me turn down the alerts over here. Probably going to get a little bit annoying, but because you see the cross happen over here, one last pumpola right here, about half a month later, and then from that high to next major low was about 54.5%, and down over the course of about 56 days. Obviously, the Rona dump one was about 51% or so. So you can see that over time, this cross, as you would expect on a maturing asset, is not having as big of a move implied with it. So I would expect, at most, we probably see about 40% from that. But, that would obviously put Bitcoin a lot lower. And again, I do expect that there is, significantly greater low side risk in the coming months. So at some point, we very likely do see a bounce probably coming off of this low $30,000 region. At that point, if you see any sort of a rejection below the 21 and 55, like let's say at about 38, for example, well, if we were to just shave off about 40% off the price action from there, that'd be about $24,000. Obviously, that fits in alignment with a lot of the other macro things that we've been looking at for Bitcoin, which I'll just point you towards yesterday's video where we go into a much more deep dive on that topic. And all of that is still very much relevant here, but I don't want to go too deep into this right now because it's not necessary actually for our current demonstration. But ultimately, I would go as far to say that, we can look at the 5-day and the weekly stochastic momentum as now kind of drivers in the sense that as long as Bitcoin is below these resolution points, very likely to have continued downside risk towards those generalized targets. I'm not going to get into the volatility versus momentum chart here. You've already seen it a million goddamn times, or you can check out yesterday's video if it's new to you. But in this case, we do see that 5-day stochastic momentum remains to the downside for this next period, which is expiring tomorrow night, I believe, as long as Bitcoin's below 40,500. So naturally speaking, that will move down. That will move down yet again. And I think the best hopium is that Bitcoin just spends some time going sideways here while that essentially resets. Weekly, also pretty nasty, as we do see weekly stochastic momentum to the downside as long as Bitcoin's below 42,800. Other than that, were there any points of hopium here? Daily funding rates are positive. That's great. Even the hourly is fucking positive. Oh, baby. That's just amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Open interest. I got a lot of shit for this, even in my own Discord, which was mean, man. I'm fucking mean talking about it, an open interest flush. But yes, it's still coming down, and I still stick with what I've been saying. Probably comes down at minimum to about 10.5 billion or so before I look at that as reset. And then the last point. Okay, so do we want to get into a bit of hopium right here? Yes. The only point of hopium that I can possibly have, or I wouldn't say that I can possibly have, but the other thing that does make me think that there is a bit of hopium here would be this. This is a back-tested result of all of the CNBC, which is like the major sort of financial news media in the US that's like, on regular TV, aired a special called Markets in Turmoil. Every time that they've aired a special called Markets in Turmoil, basically the results have been this over the next 1 year and then obviously to our current time. There is a big counterpoint to this. This only goes back to 2010. There's a reason for that, because before 2010 was 2008 and 2009, where obviously things were not as nice, but in this case, if we're going to think about a year out from now, does Bitcoin likely, or the general markets, which includes Bitcoin, likely end up higher than what we currently see right now? Probably yes, or at least, around that. So I would kind of still be expecting a general washout. I think worst case scenario is probably low 20s. Still, I'm not necessarily married to that idea that it needs to go there. I do think that things could bottom at low 30s or 25. And then, yeah, if we get a wick down to 20,000, that's fine as well. But we'll get to that bridge when we cross and when it becomes more and more relevant. Until then, downside risk remains. Very likely, a midterm bounce coming in, probably around midpoint this week, if I had to guess. But before that, I actually would be looking for maybe another short-term leg lower. So hopefully that was helpful. And there you go for Bitcoin, sirs and sirs. Forgot to show did I show my Instagram? Yeah, Instagram and Bybit, blah, 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 blah. You know it. We'll just leave it right there. Take care and see you on the next one.